For me, comics are, well, for a start, they're a passion, and that passion has been with me throughout my whole life. Since before I could even read, I was trying to read comics. You know, identity-wise, it's interesting because a big comics project that I'm working on at the moment is ultimately about letting go of all of our identities. I think the medium of comics is such a great way to explore identity and to, I think, understand ourselves and the world around us as well, actually. My artist, Sandal, is the cartooning monk. And for me, I really like the idea of bringing these two things that maybe wouldn't normally go together because the cartooning part for me is very much about the playfulness, the creativity, the drawing, the storytelling. And then the monk part for me is the values part of the work that I do. Again, you know, my other life is through meditation teaching and that kind of thing. To bring those two values together and hopefully use them to make the world a better place in some way, at least, is really inspiring for me. Perhaps comics is part of my identity in that respect. But I also think that comics is such a powerful way to change our cultural identities as well, you know, not just as individuals sharing our stories and, you know, using it as an opportunity to be authentic with who we are or what we're interested in or what we want to give voice to. And to me, that's where something like comics is so powerful as a medium and a tool, because we can change our cultural identity through comics, you know, just through sharing about what we're passionate about, or, you know, for example, choosing to engage on something like climate change, or it could be anything. You know, I get really excited by that. I think it's something that's needed, and it's an opportunity for all of us as artists to engage with and change culture. The comics world attracts a certain kind of person on the fringes, perhaps people that have been excluded more in society, marginalized groups. And it's an opportunity for us to express ourselves and create our own culture and our own identity and find companionship and community through doing that as well. And you know, that's probably one of the reasons I got into comics as an artist, because it was a way to explore my identity and connect with other people. You know, there's such a bigger picture as well that I'm starting to see more and more clearly, I think, which, yeah, is super exciting.
As a kid, I grew up watching like the Legends of Tintin and Spider-Man, Batman animation. And I really wanted to tell stories when I was in Congo, but I didn't have access to resources of what I wanted to tell about my story growing up with my family. But now I feel like being in Scotland and meeting some really cool, creative people, I can express myself, tell my stories about where I come from in this sort of utopia world that I've created. And I think that for me, I have to bring in my identity. The characters in the comic book, the actual character is me, it's E.T., Etienne from my name. And all characters in the story are real people, friends and family, and put them in the story. And because I lost my mom growing up, and I feel like as a child, when you grow up and you don't have your mom, your biological mom, you have a lot of questions that some people maybe don't answer. So I brought her as the queen mother in the story, so I can feel like as the general commander E.T. of Etienne, I can always, you know, ask her these questions that I felt like as a child I never got to ask her. So just keeping these characters alive, it feels connected to me really deeply in some way, and it makes me care about the work as well. So my identity really plays a huge role. I mean, if it's not something that is close to my heart and describes, it's about my character or represents who I am as a person, I wouldn't do it.
On the one hand, definitely if I was like meeting someone, especially in like a professional context, I obviously would be like, yeah, I'm a comic artist, or I'm an author, illustrator. Often depends who I'm talking to. I think they'll understand. I guess on the flip side, as someone disabled, it's often when my health isn't good, which it isn't most of the time, all I can do is like work or rest and pain management and like managing my illness. I'm like mostly bedbound. I have to, use a wheelchair outside the house and stuff. So I'm really like mostly just in one place on my own doing comics. And I think that it's easy, maybe especially for artists, to feel like being an artist is like the thing about them. I think also we have quite a society obviously has this big idea of like tortured genius, like a sad artist, or like, you know, like writer staying up till 5 a.m, like because they've been hit by inspiration. And I also like totally understand that temptation as someone who can't do a lot of other stuff to just be like just working on something. But I think I kind of try and encourage myself not to think of myself as like an artist, as the thing that is me. I kind of like don't necessarily want to think of like my work as like the thing about me. And I think it's like, for me, healthy and helpful not to feel like who I am is an artist or an illustrator. And it also might be the case that in the future, like the sort of like physical toll of doing comics might mean I have to like pivot into doing a different part of comics. So I guess I don't want to like pin who I am on like productivity, basically, on something that is work. I want to be able to think of it as work.
I guess I like growing up, I was a drawing kid and I'm the drawing adult. One of my biggest like comics is Our Super Adventure, which is a diary comic. So I feel like I'm a very comics person. I exist as a comic character in a way, kind of odd too, because I mean, creating like Our Super Adventure, I had like no idea it was gonna be. It connects with so many people, and I just did not see that coming when I was doing it. Like I started that project as, you know, my partner, and I love does goofy things, and my cats do goofy things, and I just wanted to tell everyone about it. But yeah, I never like foresaw the reaction that they would get online. I feel really appreciative of it. I love comics, and I love working on them, and I spend a lot of time doing them. So yeah, I feel like I identify as comics in a way. Yeah.
I sort of read them my whole life. We had a big live music pub in West London when I was a kid, and we lived above that. I don't recall many of the adults being around because they were mostly in the pub. I remember a lot of kids, but the adults left a lot of, we had live-in bar staff, and they'd leave a lot of comics around, and so I was reading things like Viz and stuff from a very young age when I definitely shouldn't have been. We moved around a lot, so I had that kind of thing where I was often a bit of an outsider. I had like a new school or a new area and I didn't know anyone, and you know, comics were that way of something you could always kind of delve into, and it's like, well, I have this. My teenage years where things, I started getting mental health problems and stuff. I would have, you know, I could go and get a 2000 AD or a deadline and just disappear into that for a bit, and often there were stories that would bring in some of those issues and you could relate to. I remember reading Halo Jones and she's having mental health problems, and you're like, oh, okay, can get my head around that, and this is interesting. And same with Deadline, there was always stuff in there that was, you felt like you were being seen, you know, and I think a lot of that's what comics does for you. I definitely think books, films, comics and music, you know, all of those have been a constant in my life that sort of helped me kind of understand myself and help me find friends and the people I want to be around. Definitely. And then now, you know, it's my life. I'm like mostly doing comics full time, and then I teach part time around it whilst trying to be a parent. Yeah, I do identify with it massively, and I love the community and I love everything about comics. I think they're a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Comics are an integral part of my identity in that ever since I was very young, I never just drew something for the sake of it looking pretty. There was always a backstory to everything I did. Like I remember when I was like 2-3 years old, I remember drawing this princess riding a horse on the way to a castle because she had to do something, you know, so it's like I wouldn't, you know, just draw it for the sake of it. I made entire full comic strips based off some of the fan fictions I read. And then, you know, that's when I sort of like fell into manga. I really like comic formats. I mean, I like illustration, I love character design. These are all things that I do, but ultimately I love telling a story with characters. And you know, I like putting things together and now they kiss. You know, that's, to me, that's, I like delivering stuff like that. The reason why I do what I do is I want to make people read my stuff and go squee. That's what I want to do. And sometimes that comes in comics, sometimes it comes with a combination of words and images, like, you know, a light novel format, which I quite like as well. But generally speaking, I do love comics. And even within my light novels, there are a few pages I do in full sequentials, you know, with like full page layout and so on, because I just can't help it, you know. And they are very much a part of me in that I actually got some really, really bad postpartum depression after both of my kids, because it felt like my hands had been chopped off. You know, if I've got to look after a kid, like, you know, like 6-8 months, you know, breastfeeding and so on, and it's like, I can't think, I can't draw. It can take me a good 20-30 minutes to get into the swing of something and to warm myself up and then, you know, get really into drawing. Every 15-20 minutes, there'll be a kid that goes, mummy, mummy, mummy. So it's very, very hard. And things got better once they started going back to school and nursery, but then it got really bad again over the pandemic, simply because I had to do so much homeschooling. That tells you just how much I need to draw in order to survive. I need to draw to live. It's what I have to do. So yeah.
Professionally, is my whole identity. Like I just, it's all I'm known for professionally, one way or another. Personally, I just think they're neat. I would say writing is a big part of my identity. I wanted to be a scriptwriter from like the age of, I don't know, 6 or something. Like I had a very clear sort of, I want to be a scriptwriter, I want to write films. And I went to university to study scripts and sort of just got really into, so script writing, playwriting is what I used to do. I got into comics towards the end of my universities, and I was like, oh, I want to learn more about comic script writing. It's just sort of the final cherry on the cake of all the script writing that I want to do. From that, I sort of got more and more into comics, and I think because I used to do art, so I was like, oh, a play, you have to have friends, and a film, you have to have money, and a radio, you have to be a nerd. So I was like, you can have no friends and still make stories, and it's called comics. Because I'm quite a visual person. So, and also like from all that playwriting, for me, the dialogue is the most important thing. I love writing dialogue so much. It doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to fiction writing. It can, but it's like you have to have other stuff going on in prose. You have to be able to like write descriptions and stuff, and that is not necessarily something that I'm super interested in. I'm more interested in just the dialogue and the characters interacting with each other. So for me, like comics sort of make a lot of sense because it's a lot of just dialogue, and then you don't have to describe anything. It's like all you have to write is the dialogue. I'm like, perfect. And then like you could just draw the stuff if like, you know, you just draw the stuff and it's like, great, there you go, that's the story.
So I think firstly, they are a part of my identity professionally. I have become associated with comics. I am known as, she's the one that does comics in Bible. You know, for example, I just had an email through for an invitation to take part in a handbook that's going to be coming out in a few years. It's to do with the Hebrew Bible, and they have set aside a chapter for comics and graphic novels. And Zanne does comics and graphic novels, so we'll invite her to be part of it. So they're very much an intrinsic part of my professional identity. In my personal identity, not so much. I like reading comics outside of my professional life, but they tend to be very different genres and styles to what I read academically or for academic purposes. So I love young adult comics. I love Lumberjanes. It's one of my favorite of all times. I love biographical comics. I love anything by Jeff Lemire. I just think the man is a god. He's so creative. I wish I could draw and paint like that. I mostly enjoy comics that are good at character building and storytelling, and I think that relates again back to my interest in the Bible, because it's the same sort of thing. But because of my work, I've also become more aware of the importance of seeking out comics by underrepresented creators, women, non-binary, trans creators, people of color, other minority creators, because I identify more with their work, and it's important for me to be shaped by them and let them shape my research too. So I think in that respect, my personal identity has been shaped by comics. I've had much more exposure to things that I might not have had otherwise if I hadn't come across certain comics.
So I got into reading comics when I was really young, and it was my uncle who would buy me comics. So he would go to the Spar, which was next to the video shop in Coatbridge, which is where I'm from, pick me up a Spider-Man, a Beano, a Dundee. He would pick this up for my brother as well, so we would share. I would come home and we would like read comics, watch movies, and just like have a really lovely time. So that was like formative. I've had like little breaks in my comics reading, but I've always came back to it. So when I was in high school, I read Brian K. Vaughan's Runaways. Then anytime somebody would ask me to write an essay, I'd write it on a comic. So like I think in 4th year I did an essay on X-23. And then my advanced higher English dissertation was on Batman. And then I wrote in university, the essay that I wrote that actually got me a recommendation letter for a master's was on a comparison of Batman Year One and Passion of Christ. And it was drawing those parallels between the Jesus myth and Batman, because my undergraduate degree is in theology and religious studies. So they've just been like a backbone of personal development and of like my academic career, and then also of my professional career. I always find a way to incorporate comics into everything I'm doing, and I always want to look for more comics work and do more comics things. It's like comics are like therapy. There was a point where I was like really depressed and I just couldn't read for a while, and I think the reason was that comics just do something to me, and they unleash something in me that makes me feel a lot of emotions. It makes me feel a lot of feelings, and I think great art can like reveal you to yourself. And at a point where I was like, I don't want to know how I feel right now, I didn't want to connect with them, and that was like a really big sign that something was wrong for me. Now comics are like they're my comfort. They're the thing that I want to spend time doing and working in and reading. And comics people are some of the nicest people I've ever met. Like I could read one comic a year and it would still be such an important experience, and I would find so much to love about the experience. I find it such a spiritual and important and formative and such like a pillar of my identity, comics reading, that like, I mean, if I read one comics a year, you can pry my love from comics out of my cold dead hands. I get very like happy when I talk about comics. They're just so integral to not just who I am as a person, but just my experience of the world.